The crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Art Gala cast dancing shadows across marble floors where Chicago's elite gathered in their finest couture. Margaret Sullivan, 58 and 7 months pregnant, stood near the entrance in a simple emerald dress she'd sewn herself, her hands instinctively protecting her rounded belly as whispers and barely concealed laughter rippled through the crowd. After 30 years as a respected art restoration specialist, she'd been invited to this evening's celebration of a major museum acquisition, a piece she'd personally restored. But her recent divorce, unexpected late-in-life pregnancy, and financial struggles had transformed her from respected colleague to object of cruel gossip. What the laughing socialites in their designer gowns didn't know was that Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansouri, one of the world's most influential art collectors and philanthropists, was watching from across the room. The 62-year-old billionaire had flown from Dubai specifically for this gala, and the woman everyone was mocking was about to become the center of his undivided attention, for reasons that would leave the entire room speechless. Margaret fought the urge to turn and leave as she heard the whispered comments cutting through the classical music. "Did you see that dress? Looks like she made it from curtains. Pregnant at her age? How desperate. I heard her husband left her for his paralegal. Can you imagine?" Each word felt like a physical blow, but she forced herself to stand tall, one hand resting on her belly where her daughter, her miracle baby, kicked gently as if offering encouragement. She'd worked too hard on restoring the 15th century Venetian masterpiece that was tonight's centerpiece to let cruel gossip drive her away from seeing it properly displayed for the first time. She moved slowly through the crowd toward the exhibition hall, feeling the weight of judgmental stares following her. Every step. The dress she wore had indeed been made by her own hands, from fabric she'd carefully selected and stitched late into the night after long days at the restoration studio. There had been no money for designer gowns after David had cleaned out their joint accounts before filing for divorce, leaving her with nothing but her skills and the tiny life growing inside her. But the emerald silk she'd chosen brought out the color of her eyes, and she'd embroidered delicate gold threads along the neckline in a pattern that echoed the Renaissance art she loved. To her, it was beautiful, even if no one else could see past the lack of a prestigious label. As she reached the archway leading to the main exhibition hall, a particularly loud laugh made her pause. Veronica Ashford, wife of a prominent real estate developer and self-appointed queen of Chicago's art scene, stood with a circle of equally adorned women, making no effort to lower her voice. Look at her. Waddle in that homemade sack. Margaret Sullivan used to have some dignity before she got herself knocked up like a teenager. I heard she tried to trap her ex-husband with the pregnancy, but he was smart enough to see through it. Now she's probably here hunting for her next victim, some rich old fool who'll feel sorry for her. The women's laughter echoed off the marble walls, each peal feeling like another nail in Margaret's coffin of humiliation. Margaret's cheeks burned as she blinked. You back tears, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Her pregnancy had been unexpected, but was not the manipulation Veronica suggested. David had left months before she discovered she was pregnant, abandoning their 32-year marriage for a woman half his age. The baby was a surprise, yes, but also the greatest gift Margaret had ever received. At 58, she'd long since accepted that children weren't in her future. This late blessing felt like a second chance at life, even if it came wrapped in financial struggle and social ostracism. What hurt most wasn't the mockery of her appearance, but the way her former friends had abandoned her the moment scandal touched her life. These same women had welcomed her warmly when she'd been Mrs. David Sullivan, wife of a successful corporate attorney, hostess of elegant dinner parties in their Lincoln Park brownstone. Now that she was a divorced, pregnant woman, living in a modest apartment in Rogers Park, working overtime to save money for the baby's arrival, they treated her like she carried some contagious disease. The hypocrisy stung more than the cruel words. She was about to push through into the exhibition hall, away from the venomous gossip, when a deep voice with a refined British Arabic accent spoke directly behind her. "Forgive my intrusion, but I couldn't help overhearing those unconscionable comments." I hope you won't allow such small-minded cruelty to diminish what should be an evening of celebration. Margaret turned to find herself looking up at a tall man whose presence commanded immediate attention. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but it was his eyes, warm brown and filled with genuine kindness, that struck her most. There was something both ancient and timeless in his gaze, a depth that suggested he'd seen much of life's complexity and had learned to value what truly mattered. "I'm Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansouri," he continued, offering a slight bow that felt both courtly and natural. "I've traveled from Dubai specifically for tonight's unveiling. I understand you were responsible for the restoration of the Billionaire Madonna. I've been eager to meet the artist whose work preserved such beauty for future generations." His words were spoken with such genuine respect that Margaret found herself speechless for a moment. This man, clearly someone of significant importance judging by the way heads were beginning to turn in their direction, was treating her not as an object of pity or mockery, but as a professional worthy of recognition. Yes, I'm Margaret Sullivan," she managed, extending her hand with as much composure as she could muster. The restoration took nearly 2 years. The painting had suffered extensive smoke damage, and several of the original glazes had deteriorated badly. It was challenging work, but also deeply rewarding. The Madonna's expression, there's such tenderness in it. I felt honored to help preserve that for others to experience. As she spoke about her work, some of the tension in her shoulders eased. This was familiar territory, where her expertise mattered more than gossip or appearance. Rashid's handshake was firm but gentle, and he held her hand a moment longer than convention required, his eyes studying her face with what seemed like genuine interest. "Tenderness," he repeated softly. "Yes, that's exactly what I see in the piece, and what I see in you right now, despite the unkindness you've endured tonight. The way you rest your hand protectively on your child speaks of the same maternal love the artist captured centuries ago. May I have the honor of escorting you to view your masterful work? I would be grateful for your insights into the restoration process, and perhaps my presence beside you will encourage those with wagging tongues to reconsider their behavior." There was a subtle edge to his words, a quiet power that suggested he was accustomed to being heard and respected, orchestrated romantic narrative balancing cultural respect and social transformation. Margaret felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones as Rashid offered his arm. She glanced toward the group of women who'd been mocking her moments before and saw their expressions had transformed from smug superiority to shocked confusion. They were clearly trying to place who this distinguished gentleman was and why he was showing such marked attention to the woman they'd been ridiculing. Taking a steadying breath, Margaret accepted his offered arm, feeling the strength and warmth of it through the fine fabric of his tuxedo sleeve. "I would be honored, Sheikh Al-Mansouri, though I should warn you that associating with me might damage your social standing here tonight. I seem to have become persona non grata among Chicago's art elite. Please, don't call me Rashid," he said with a warm smile that reached his eyes and created attractive lines at their corners, the kind earned through years of genuine laughter and lived experience. "And I assure you, Ms. Sullivan, my social standing is quite secure, regardless of whose arm I'm on. What concerns me more is that a woman of obvious talent and grace is being treated with such disrespect. In my culture, we honor pregnant women as carrying sacred life. The mockery I witnessed is not only cruel, but reveals a profound spiritual poverty in those who engage in it." He began to guide her toward the exhibition hall, his pace deliberately slow and considerate of her condition, never rushing or pulling her along. As they walked, Margaret became acutely aware of the silence that fell over nearby conversations, replaced by urgent whispers. She caught fragments. "That's Sheikh Al-Mansouri, Dubai, owns half the art galleries in the Middle East, donated 20 million to the museum last year. Why is he with Sullivan?" The woman who'd been ostracized moments ago was suddenly fascinating simply because she had the attention of someone who mattered. The realization was both vindicating and sad. She was the same person she'd been 5 minutes ago, but now she was worthy of notice because a powerful man acknowledged her worth. Still, she couldn't deny the relief of no longer being alone in the shark's feeding frenzy. The exhibition hall took Margaret's breath away. Despite having seen the space during installation preparations, the Bellini Madonna hung in a place of honor, perfectly lit to showcase the subtle glazes and delicate brushwork she'd spent countless hours preserving. The painting depicted Mary holding the infant Jesus, her face reflecting a complex mixture of joy, wonder, and the knowledge of future sorrow. It was that nuanced emotional depth that had made the restoration so challenging and so meaningful. Seeing it now, properly, displayed and admired, brought tears to Margaret's eyes, tears of professional pride and personal connection. She understood that mixture of joy and sorrow, hope and uncertainty, in a way she never had before becoming pregnant. "It's breathtaking," Rashid said quietly, his voice full of genuine awe. "The restoration is so seamless that it's impossible to see where damage once existed. You've truly brought new life to an old master. Tell me, what was the most challenging aspect of the work?" He stood close beside her, his attention focused entirely on Margaret and the painting, ignoring the growing crowd of people who were trying to position themselves within earshot of their conversation. His genuine interest in her professional expertise felt like water in a desert, something she'd been desperately thirsty for without fully realizing it until this moment. Margaret found herself relaxing as she began to explain the technical challenges, the delicate process of removing centuries of discolored varnish without damaging the original paint layers, the research required to identify period-appropriate materials for repairs, the countless hours spent under magnification recreating tiny details that had been lost to time and smoke damage. As she spoke, her hand gestures became animated, her face bright with passion for her craft. She forgot about the dress she wore, forgot about the whispers, forgot about everything except the joy of discussing work she loved with someone who genuinely appreciated it. Rashid listened with complete attention, asking insightful questions that revealed his own deep knowledge of art history and conservation techniques. "The Madonna's hands were particularly damaged," Margaret explained, pointing to the delicate fingers that cradled the infant. "The original glazes had completely deteriorated in that area, leaving the flesh tones flat and lifeless. I spent 3 months researching Bellini's technique, studying other works from the same period, even traveling to Venice to examine his paintings in the churches there. I was determined to recreate not just the appearance, but the emotional quality of those hands, the tenderness of a mother's touch. Every time I felt discouraged, I would place my own hand on my belly and feel my daughter move, and somehow that helped me understand what Bellini was trying to capture, the physical memory of love, if that makes sense." Rashid's expression softened even further, and there was something deeply emotional in his eyes as he looked from the painting to Margaret's protective hand on her own belly. "It makes perfect sense," he said quietly. "You brought your own experience of carrying life into the work of restoration. That's not just technical skill, that's art informing art across centuries. Your daughter has already contributed to preserving beauty for the world, and she hasn't even been born yet. That's quite a legacy to begin with." His words brought a lump to Margaret's throat because they acknowledged what no one else had, that her pregnancy wasn't a shameful mistake or desperate attempt to trap a man, but something meaningful and precious in its own right. "I haven't thought of it that way," Margaret admitted, her voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "Everyone else seems to see this pregnancy as the worst mistake of my life, evidence of poor judgment, bad planning, or pathetic desperation. My ex-husband certainly did. When I told him I was pregnant, he accused me of trying to manipulate him into staying, even though we'd been separated for 4 months by then. He made it very clear that he wanted nothing to do with either of us." She hadn't meant to share something so personal with a stranger, but something about Rashid's genuine kindness made the words spill out. Perhaps it was also the relief of finally speaking to someone who didn't look at her with pity or contempt. "Then your ex-husband is a fool," Rashid said with quiet conviction, his accent giving the words a weight that made them feel like more than polite reassurance. "To have a woman of your intelligence, talent and grace, and to abandon her when she's carrying his child, that speaks of profound character failure on his part, not yours. In my culture, family is everything. A man who walks away from his own blood, who fails to protect and honor the mother of his child, is considered to have lost his way completely. You, on the other hand, have chosen life and love despite difficult circumstances. That requires courage that should be celebrated, not mocked. He paused, then added with a slight smile, also, for what it's worth, the dress you're wearing is far more elegant than most of the overwrought designer pieces I've seen tonight. There's an artistry to it that reflects your own creative spirit. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks at the compliment, and for the first time that evening, it wasn't from shame. You're very kind, though I suspect you're being generous about my sewing skills. I'm much better at restoring paintings than creating fashion, but thank you. It means more than you know to have someone see the effort rather than just the lack of an expensive label. She smoothed the fabric over her belly self-consciously, then looked back at the painting. I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing, bringing a child into the world at my age, raising her alone. I'll be 76 when she graduates high school. What if I'm being selfish, wanting this baby so much when I can't give her the traditional family structure, the financial security, all the things children should have? May I share something personal? Rashid asked, and when Margaret nodded, he continued, I lost my wife, Layla, 12 years ago to cancer. We had been married for 30 years and had 3 children together, all grown now with families of their own. I was 50 when she died, and I believed my life's greatest chapters were behind me. I threw myself into business and philanthropy, into being a grandfather, into anything that might fill the emptiness. But I've learned that life doesn't follow our scripts. Second chances come in unexpected forms, and age is far less important than the capacity for love. Your daughter won't care that you're older than other mothers. She'll care that she's cherished, that she grows up seeing a woman of strength and talent who chose her, who created a life for her through determination and creativity. That's worth more than any traditional structure. Margaret blinked back fresh tears, but these were different from the ones she'd fought earlier. These came from a place of recognition, of being truly seen and understood by someone who wasn't offering empty platitudes, but speaking from his own experience of loss and rebuilding. Thank you, she whispered. I needed to hear. That tonight. I've been feeling so alone in this, so uncertain about everything. My family is scattered. My parents are gone. My siblings live overseas. Most of my friends have sided with David or simply disappeared. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy, if everyone else is right and I'm delusional for being happy about this pregnancy, despite everything falling apart around me. You're not crazy, Rashid assured her firmly. You're human, with all the messy complexity that entails. Life rarely fits into neat categories of right and wrong, wise and foolish. Sometimes the most meaningful things we do appear foolish to others because they can't see what we see, feel what we feel. Your joy in your daughter is real and valid regardless of circumstances. Don't let anyone steal that from you. He gestured toward the painting. Bellini painted this Madonna knowing she would face hardship, that she would watch her son suffer, that nothing about her path would be easy. But look at her face. There's no regret there, only love. You have that same quality, Ms. Sullivan. I recognized it the moment I saw you standing in that hallway, protecting your child with quiet dignity, while small minds threw their petty darts. Before Margaret could respond, a museum curator approached, clearly eager to speak with Rashid, but trying to appear casual about it. Sheikh Al-Mansouri, what a pleasure to have you here tonight. I trust you're enjoying the exhibition. We're particularly proud of the Bellini acquisition and restoration, such a significant addition to our permanent collection. The curator, Martin Webb, barely glanced at Margaret, though she'd worked directly with him throughout the restoration process. It was as if she'd become invisible again the moment the conversation turned to the museum's interests rather than art itself. I am indeed impressed, Mr. Webb, Rashid replied with professional courtesy, but without the warmth he'd shown. Margaret, the restoration is exceptional, thanks to Ms. Sullivan's extraordinary skill and dedication. I understand she spent 2 years on this project. The museum is fortunate to have someone of her caliber associated with this acquisition. In fact, I was hoping to discuss commissioning Ms. Sullivan for a restoration project I'm planning in Dubai. I recently acquired a 15th century Persian manuscript that suffered water damage, and after seeing her work tonight, I can think of no one better qualified to assess and potentially restore it. The way he spoke made it clear this wasn't a casual thought, but a serious professional offer, and Margaret's heart leapt at the implications. Martin Webb's expression shifted rapidly from polite disinterest to keen attention as he finally looked directly at Margaret. Ms. Sullivan, I had no idea you were considering international projects. That's quite an opportunity. Sheikh Al-Mansouri, if Margaret is unavailable or you need additional recommendations, I'm sure we could suggest other conservators from our network who might be interested in such a significant commission. He was already trying to insert himself into the conversation, to claim credit or control over an opportunity he'd shown no interest in creating. I'm not interested in other conservators, Rashid said coolly, his tone making clear he saw exactly what Webb was doing. I'm interested in Ms. Sullivan specifically because of her demonstrated expertise and the care she brings to her work. However, that's a conversation for another time, when Ms. Sullivan and I can discuss details properly without the distractions of a social event. He turned back to Margaret with a genuine smile that was noticeably warmer than the one he'd given the curator. Would you do me the honor of joining me for dinner tomorrow evening? We could discuss the project in detail, and I would very much enjoy hearing more about your restoration work. There's a quiet Lebanese restaurant I know in River North that serves excellent food if you enjoy Middle Eastern cuisine. Margaret felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. In the span of 20 minutes, she'd gone from being the object of cruel mockery to receiving a professional commission from an internationally renowned art collector and an invitation to dinner that felt like more than just business. She could see Martin Webb trying to insert himself into the conversation again, could sense the attention of other guests turned toward their small group, could practically feel Veronica Ashford's shocked stare burning into her back. But all of that faded as she looked into Rashid's warm brown eyes and saw only genuine interest, respectful admiration, and something else she was afraid to name because it seemed too impossible, too sudden to be real. I would love to discuss the project, Margaret said carefully, trying to keep her voice professional even as her heart raced. And yes, I enjoy Lebanese food very much. There was a small restaurant near my old neighborhood that my husband and I used to frequent. She trailed off, the mention of her ex-husband reminding her of how much her life had changed. That is, I haven't been there in a while, but I always loved the flavors, the spices, the freshness, the way each dish felt like it was made with care. Tomorrow evening would be perfect if you're certain you want to. Spend your limited time in Chicago discussing restoration work with me. I can think of no better way to spend my time, Rashid assured her with a sincerity that made her believe him. Shall I collect you at 7? If you provide me with your address, I'll arrange for my driver to pick you up. I don't want you navigating the city alone in the evening, especially—" He gestured gently toward her belly, his concern clearly protective rather than patronizing. "Please forgive me if I'm being presumptuous, but I believe pregnant women should be cared for and protected, not left to manage everything alone. It would honor me to ensure you travel safely tomorrow evening." Margaret felt emotion well up in her throat again. It had been so long since anyone had shown such consideration for her well-being, such basic human kindness without expecting something in return. David had made her feel like a burden in those final months of their marriage, always impatient with her needs, always suggesting she was being dramatic or needy when she asked for help. This man, this near stranger, was offering courtesy and protection without making her feel weak or incapable. "That's very thoughtful, Rashid. Thank you. I live in Rogers Park now. It's quite a distance from downtown, so I don't want to inconvenience your driver." "No place in Chicago is an inconvenience," Rashid said firmly. "Rogers Park is a lovely neighborhood, very diverse, good schools nearby, close to the lake. You've chosen well for raising your daughter. Please text me your address when you have a moment." He produced a business card from his jacket pocket, and Margaret noticed his hand as he handed it to her. Strong, elegant fingers, no wedding ring, nails neatly trimmed. The card itself was simple but expensive, embossed with gold lettering that read Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansouri, followed by a Dubai address and a phone number with an international code. I look forward to tomorrow. Evening very much, Margaret. May I call you Margaret? Miss Sullivan feels too formal for someone whose art has moved me so deeply tonight. Of course, Rashid, Margaret replied, tucking the card carefully into her small handbag. And thank you again, not just for dinner or the project opportunity, but for... She glanced around at the crowd that had gathered, all those faces that had been so cruel earlier now watching with fascination and no small amount of envy, for seeing me, for treating me with respect when everyone else seemed determined to tear me down. I won't forget your kindness tonight. She meant every word. Whatever happened tomorrow, whether the dinner led to a professional relationship or something more, or simply remained a single kind evening in a difficult time, she would remember this moment when someone had chosen to honor her humanity rather than judge her circumstances. Rashid's expression softened with something that looked almost like relief. Margaret, I must be honest with you. The moment I saw you standing in that hallway, protecting your child while others showed such cruelty, I felt something I haven't felt in 12 years. You reminded me that there is still beauty in the world, still grace and dignity in the face of hardship. Tomorrow evening is not just about a restoration project, though that opportunity is genuine. It's about wanting to know more about the woman who could stand tall in a room full of mockery, who could speak with such passion about preserving beauty for future generations, who carries life within her and radiates maternal love, even when she's been abandoned by those who should have protected her. I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable, but I wanted you to know my intentions are not purely professional. Margaret's breath caught in her chest as she processed Rashid's words. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the courage it took for a man of his stature and position to make such an admission, especially to someone he'd just met. Part of her wanted to protect herself, to dismiss this as impossible. She was 58, pregnant with another man's child, living in a tiny apartment with no financial security and a trail of broken dreams behind her. What could a billionaire sheikh possibly see in her? But another part of her, the part that had been slowly dying under the weight of rejection and mockery, suddenly felt alive again. Maybe life didn't have to follow logical patterns. Maybe second chances really did come when you least expected them. I'm not uncomfortable, Margaret said softly, her hand instinctively going to her belly where her daughter kicked as if in encouragement. I'm surprised, honored, maybe a little scared because I've learned that hope can be dangerous when you've already lost so much. But I'm also glad you were honest. I've had too much dishonesty in my life recently. Whatever tomorrow brings, I appreciate your directness. She paused, then added with a small smile that held both warmth and caution, though I should probably warn you that I'm a package deal now. This little one comes with me everywhere, and soon she'll be here in person, rather than just as a bump under my dress. That's a lot to ask any man to consider, especially someone who already raised his own family. Rashid's response was to gently take Margaret's hand, the one that had been resting on her belly, and hold it between both of his own. His hands were warm and strong, and the gesture felt both respectful and deeply intimate. Margaret, I raised 3 children, and I now have 4 grandchildren who are the lights of my life. I understand exactly what children require. The sleepless nights, the constant needs, the way they transform every aspect of your existence. I also know that love doesn't diminish with age, but expands. When my youngest daughter told me she was pregnant with her first child, I wept with joy because family is what gives life meaning. Your daughter isn't a burden or complication. She's a blessing, and any man worthy of you would see that immediately. I see it. I saw it the moment I watched you protecting her in that hallway, standing tall despite the cruelty around you. Margaret felt tears streaming down her cheeks now, unable to hold them back any longer. But these weren't tears of shame or pain. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of a burden she'd been carrying alone, suddenly feeling a little lighter because someone was offering to share its weight. I need to sit down for a moment, she admitted, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the emotion of the evening. Rashid immediately guided her to a nearby bench. his arm supporting her with careful strength, and sat beside her with a respectful distance that somehow still felt protective. Around them, the party continued, but it had become background noise to the small bubble of connection they'd created. "I apologize," Margaret said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't usually fall apart in public like this. It's just been such a difficult few months. The divorce, discovering I was pregnant, losing my home, watching friends disappear, working overtime to save money while feeling exhausted all the time. And tonight, walking into this party and hearing those women laugh at me, at my dress, at my pregnancy, at everything I've been trying so hard to hold together. It felt like the final confirmation that I'd somehow gotten everything wrong, that I was foolish to be happy about this baby when clearly everyone else sees her as a mistake or punishment for something I did wrong." Rashid produced a perfectly pressed handkerchief from his pocket, an old-fashioned gesture that somehow fit him perfectly, and gently wiped her tears with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "You haven't gotten anything wrong," he said firmly. "The world has gotten it wrong by teaching people to value wealth and status over character, to judge a woman's worth by her relationship status or age rather than her soul. In my tradition, there's a saying, the best wealth is contentment of the soul. You have that, Margaret. Despite losing everything material, despite facing mockery and abandonment, you still have contentment in your soul because you know your daughter is a gift. That makes you richer than everyone in this room combined." "I don't feel very rich right now," Margaret admitted with a watery laugh. "I feel exhausted and scared, and sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, bringing her into a situation where I can barely afford rent and formula, where she won't have siblings or a father or any of the things children should have. I lie awake at night doing calculations, trying to figure out how I'll manage when I have to take maternity leave, whether I'll be able to find childcare I can afford, whether I can keep working the irregular hours that restoration projects require when I'm responsible for a baby on my own. It's terrifying, Rashid. And tonight, hearing those women confirm all my worst fears about being judged and found lacking, it almost broke me." Rashid was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful as he carefully folded the handkerchief and placed it in her hand. "Keep this," he said. "You might need it again, and I have plenty more where that came from." Then he shifted slightly on the bench so he could look directly at her. "Margaret, I won't pretend to know what it's like to raise a child alone, especially at a stage in life when most people are planning retirement, not midnight feedings. But I do know that love finds a way. My own mother raised 4 children while my father traveled constantly for business. She often said she felt alone, even though she was married. Your situation is different, but perhaps not as different as you. Think. You have skills, you have strength, you have the capacity to love. Those are the essentials. The rest, the logistics, the finances, the practical concerns, those can be addressed with planning and support." "I wish I had your confidence," Margaret said, managing a small smile. "But thank you for not telling me everything will magically work out, or that love is all I need. I appreciate realistic compassion more than false reassurance." She looked down at the handkerchief in her hand, noting the embroidered initials RAM in one corner, the fine quality of the linen. Everything about this man suggested thoughtfulness, from the handkerchief he carried to the careful way he'd listened to her fears, without trying to immediately fix everything or dismiss her concerns. "You mentioned you lost your wife 12 years ago. Do you mind if I ask, has there been anyone since? Or is tomorrow actually as significant as it feels?" Rashid's smile held both sadness and hope. "There have been a few attempts at dating over the years, usually arranged by well-meaning friends or family members who worried about me being alone, but nothing ever felt right. I would sit across from accomplished, lovely women and feel nothing but polite distance. I began to think perhaps one great love was all I was meant to have in this lifetime, that Layla had been my soulmate, and there was no point searching for what couldn't be found twice. Then tonight, I watched you walk into this building in your emerald dress, your head held high despite the whispers, your hand protecting your child, and I felt something shift in my chest. It was as if I'd been holding my breath for 12 years and suddenly remembered how to breathe again. Margaret felt her own breath catch at his words, at the raw honesty of them. "That's a lot of expectation to place on someone you just met," she said quietly, but there was no accusation in her voice. Only cautious wonder. "I'm not sure I can live up to that kind of feeling, Rashid. I'm not some romantic heroine or perfect woman. I'm just someone who made a nice dress out of necessity and who happens to be good at fixing old paintings. Tomorrow you might look at me in daylight and realize you built me into something I'm not. Or tomorrow I might look at you in daylight and confirm what I already suspect, that you're someone rare and precious who I would be a fool not to pursue," Rashid countered gently. "Margaret, I'm not asking you to be perfect or to live up to some fantasy. I'm asking you to have dinner with me, to share conversation, to allow the possibility that sometimes life offers unexpected gifts, even in our later years. That's all. No pressure, no expectations beyond honest connection. If tomorrow we discover we have nothing in common beyond art restoration, then at least you'll have gained a professional commission and I'll have had the pleasure of an interesting evening. But if we discover what I suspect we might, that there's something deeper here worth exploring, then we'll navigate that together carefully and with respect for everything you're dealing with right now." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, Margaret processing everything that had happened in the past hour, while Rashid simply remained present beside her, not pushing for more words or declarations. Finally, Margaret stood, feeling steadier than she had all evening. "I should probably go home soon. These heels aren't as comfortable as they were when I first put them on, and my daughter seems to be practicing gymnastics against my ribs, but I'm glad I stayed long enough to meet you, Rashid. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already given me something precious tonight. You reminded me that not everyone in the world is cruel, that my worth isn't determined by designer labels or relationship status, that maybe I'm not as alone as I've been feeling." Rashid stood, as well, moving with the easy grace of someone who maintained physical fitness despite his 62 years. "May I walk you to your car? Or did you take public transportation?" When Margaret admitted she'd taken the train because parking downtown was prohibitively expensive, his expression became determined. "Then please allow my driver to take you home. The train at this hour, in your condition, I would worry. And before you protest about inconveniencing me, know that my driver is literally being paid to sit in the parking structure waiting for me. So you would actually be doing him a favor by giving him something to do. Besides, it would give me peace of mind knowing you arrived home safely. Chicago can be unpredictable late at night." Margaret was about to argue that she'd been taking public transportation for months without incident, but the truth was she was tired, her feet hurt, and the thought of navigating the Red Line and then walking the 3 blocks from the Rogers Park station to her apartment building in heels and a dress did feel daunting at this moment. "If you're sure it's not an imposition," she said finally, "though I insist on writing down my address for tomorrow's dinner rather than making your driver wait while I go upstairs and come back down with it. I appreciate the gallantry, but I also don't want to take advantage of your kindness." "It's not an imposition, it's a privilege," Rashid corrected with a warm smile. "Come, let me introduce you to Khalid. He's been with me for 15 years and has the patience of a saint. He drove me from the airport straight here tonight and hasn't complained once about the wait. He'll be delighted to have a passenger." He offered his arm again, and Margaret took it, grateful for the support as they walked toward the exit. She could feel eyes following them. Veronica Ashford's group of society matrons, Martin Webb, the curator, other guests who'd witnessed the transformation of the evening's object of mockery into the companion of an international art collector. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated by their shocked attention, but mostly she just felt tired and ready to be home. Khalid turned out to be a pleasant man in his late 40s who greeted Margaret with respectful courtesy and opened the back door of a sleek Mercedes with practiced grace. Rashid insisted on helping her into the car, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of managing, his hand gentle but firm on her elbow as she settled into the leather seat. "Tomorrow at 7, he reminded her through the open door. "And Margaret, Please don't spend tonight doubting yourself or what happened here this evening. Trust your instincts. Mine are telling me that meeting you tonight was meant to happen, and I've learned to listen to such feelings. They've rarely led me astray in 62 years of life. 7 o'clock, Margaret confirmed, her hand instinctively going to her belly, where her daughter had finally settled into stillness, perhaps sensing her mother's emotional exhaustion. And Rashid, thank you for everything. You didn't have to intervene tonight, didn't have to offer me your arm or defend me or show me such kindness. You could have viewed the painting and left without ever acknowledging the pregnant woman in the homemade dress. But you didn't, and that means more than you probably realize. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'm grateful for tonight. She meant it with every fiber of her being. Even if tomorrow's dinner proved disappointing, even if this connection turned out to be nothing more than a kind gesture from a compassionate stranger, tonight he had restored something in her that the past months had nearly destroyed, her faith that good people still existed in the world. Rashid's eyes softened with emotion as he reached through the open door to squeeze her hand one last time. I think you'll find, Margaret, that I'm not in the habit of making empty gestures. When I commit to something or someone, I do so fully. Sleep well, Habibi. He stepped back and closed the door gently, then spoke briefly to Khalid in Arabic before the driver nodded and pulled away from the curb. Margaret watched through the rear window as Rashid stood on the sidewalk outside the museum, his hands in his pockets, watching the car until it turned the corner and he disappeared from view. The term of endearment he'd used, Habibi, lingered in her mind, even though she didn't know its exact meaning. The warmth in his voice when he'd spoken it told her everything she needed to know. The drive to Rogers Park passed in a comfortable silence. Khalid navigated the late-night Chicago traffic with expert ease, and Margaret found herself relaxing against the leather seat, her hand resting on her belly as she processed the evening's extraordinary events. She pulled out her phone and carefully entered Rashid's number from his business card, then sent him a quick text with her address. His response came almost immediately. Thank you. Rest well. I'm already counting the hours until tomorrow evening. The message made her smile despite her exhaustion. It felt real, this connection, not like a fairy tale or fantasy, but like something solid and possible. Two mature adults who'd lived full lives and experienced loss and were now unexpectedly finding each other at a stage when both had assumed such discoveries were behind them. By the time Khalid pulled up in front of her modest apartment building, Margaret felt the full weight of exhaustion settling into her bones. Pregnancy was hard enough without the emotional roller coaster of tonight's events. Khalid came around to open her door and helped her out with the same respectful courtesy Rashid had shown. Thank you so much, Margaret told him sincerely. This was incredibly kind of both you and Rashid. Please drive, safely getting back downtown. Khalid smiled and assured her it was his pleasure, then waited until she'd safely entered the building's lobby before driving away. Through the glass doors, Margaret watched the Mercedes disappear into the night, and part of her wondered if she'd somehow imagined the entire evening. But no, she still held Rashid's embroidered handkerchief in her hand, still had his business card in her purse, still had the text messages on her phone confirming tomorrow's dinner. It had all been real. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment slowly, her heels clicking on the worn linoleum, her hand on the railing for support. The building was quiet at this hour, most of her neighbors already asleep. Inside her small 1-bedroom apartment, Margaret kicked off her shoes with relief and went immediately to the bathroom to examine herself in the full-length mirror mounted on the back of the door. The woman who looked back at her was 58 years old, 7 months pregnant, wearing a homemade dress that would never appear in a fashion magazine. But she was also someone else, someone who'd survived betrayal and loss, who'd chosen life and love despite overwhelming odds, who'd spent 2 years of painstaking work to preserve beauty for future generations, who'd stood tall in a room full of mockery because she knew her own worth, even when others didn't recognize it. Rashid had seen that woman. He'd looked past the circumstances and the pregnancy and the cheap apartment, and had seen the person underneath. That recognition felt like the most precious gift she'd received in years, perhaps in her entire adult life. Margaret carefully removed the emerald dress and hung it in her closet, running her hand over the fabric one last time. She'd worn it expecting to feel shame, and instead it had become part of a night that might change her entire life. After washing her face and changing into comfortable pajamas, she settled into bed with her laptop, unable to resist the urge to learn more about the man who'd so thoroughly disrupted her evening. A simple search for Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansouri brought up hundreds of results. Articles about his art collection, his philanthropic work, his business empire spanning real estate and technology, his late wife's foundation supporting women's education in the Middle East. The photographs showed a man who looked exactly as he had. Tonight, distinguished, elegant, but always with warmth in his eyes when photographed with family or at charitable events. There were pictures of him with his children and grandchildren, all of them clearly close-knit despite living across continents. Articles described him as reclusive but generous, someone who avoided society events but donated millions to causes he believed in. One profile from an art magazine mentioned his deceased wife, Layla, describing their marriage as a legendary partnership, and noting that Sheikh Al-Mansouri had never seriously dated since her death, leading to speculation that he remains devoted to her memory. Until tonight, apparently. Margaret closed her laptop and turned off the light, lying in the darkness with one hand on her belly. Her daughter moved gently, as if sensing her mother's tumultuous emotions. "What do you think, little one?" Margaret whispered into the quiet room. "Is this crazy? Am I setting myself up for more heartbreak by hoping that tonight meant what it seemed to mean? Or is your mama being given a second chance at happiness just when she thought all chances were used up?" The baby kicked in response. Whether in encouragement or warning, Margaret couldn't say. But lying there in the dark, she made a decision to trust. Trust Rashid's sincerity, trust her own instincts, trust that sometimes life offered unexpected gifts, even when you'd stopped believing in miracles. The next morning arrived, with late autumn sunshine streaming through Margaret's apartment windows. She woke feeling rested, despite the emotional intensity of the previous evening, and her first thought was of tonight's dinner. 7 o'clock felt simultaneously too far away and dangerously soon. She needed time to prepare, to choose what to wear, to calm her nerves, but she also wanted the hours to rush past so she could see Rashid again and confirm that last night had been real. After a simple breakfast and a quick shower, Margaret found herself standing in front of her closet trying to decide what to wear. Nothing seemed right. Too casual, too formal, too maternity, not maternity enough. Finally, she chose a simple navy dress that flattered her figure while accommodating her pregnancy, paired with a soft cream cardigan and low heels that wouldn't kill her feet. The afternoon dragged by as Margaret tried to occupy herself with laundry and light housework, avoiding the temptation to constantly check her phone for messages from Rashid. Around 4 o'clock, her phone chimed with an incoming text. "I hope you slept well. I've been thinking about you all day, looking forward to this evening more than I can express. The restaurant has a private dining room where we can talk without interruption. I want to hear everything about your life, your work, your dreams for your daughter. Until 7, Habibi, Duru." Margaret read the message 3 times, her heart swelling with each reading. The fact that he'd been thinking about her all day, that he wanted to know not just about her professional work, but about her personal dreams. It felt too good to be true, and yet here it was in black and white on her phone screen. At 6:30, Margaret was as ready as she could be, standing by her apartment window watching for the Mercedes. When it pulled up precisely at 7, she grabbed her purse and headed downstairs, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made her feel like a teenager going on her first date. Except she wasn't a teenager. She was a 58-year-old pregnant woman about to have dinner with a 62-year-old widower. This was mature adult connection, not youthful infatuation, and yet the butterflies in her stomach felt remarkably similar to ones she remembered from decades past. Khalid greeted her with a warm smile and held the door, and as Margaret settled into the back seat, she caught sight of Rashid waiting inside the car, dressed in a beautifully tailored suit, his face breaking into a brilliant smile when he saw her. "Margaret," he said, taking her hand and bringing it briefly to his lips in a gesture that was both courtly and genuine. "You look absolutely radiant. How are you feeling today? Did you rest well?" The way he asked, with real concern rather than polite ritual, made her smile. "I slept better than I have in months," she admitted, "though I'll confess I spent a part of this morning Googling you and reading about your art collection and philanthropic work. I hope that doesn't seem stalkerish. I just wanted to know more about the man who turned my entire evening around last night." Rashid laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I would have been disappointed if you hadn't researched me. I did the same with you, found articles about your restoration work, reviews from museum curators, even a lovely interview you gave 5 years ago about the importance of preserving cultural heritage for future generations. Everything I read only confirmed what I sensed last night, that you're someone rare and special, Margaret Sullivan." As Khalid navigated through Chicago's evening traffic toward River North, Margaret and Rashid talked easily, the conversation flowing from art to family to dreams for the future. He told her about his children and grandchildren, about the joy and challenges of maintaining close family bonds across continents, about how becoming a grandfather had taught him that love only multiplies rather than dividing. She told him about her childhood in Michigan, her decades working in art restoration, her marriage's slow dissolution, her complicated feelings about becoming a mother at 58. There was no judgment in Rashid's eyes as she spoke, only deep attention and understanding. And when they arrived at the restaurant, an elegant establishment with soft lighting and the scent of za'atar and sumac in the air, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next, tonight was the beginning of something that would change her life forever. Not because a billionaire had rescued her from mockery, but because two people who'd lived full lives and knew the weight of both joy and sorrow had recognized something precious in each other, the possibility of a second chance at love when they'd both stopped expecting one.